we're going to try breakout rooms again. And so what we are asking you to do is, would you please go to hover over your profile picture, go to the 3 dots that you'll see there, and rename yourself, first name, last name, and the grade that you'd like to look at. And we've been practicing. I think we've gotten all the bugs out of it. So hopefully today's technology goes much smoother than it did yesterday. We apologize, but we're learning this too. So really excited to have you all join us in this 5th session around assessment. And we know that these last 2 sessions, teachers have lots of questions for them. And so without further ado, we want to kind of get into those questions and take you back to our Jamboard and have you answer 2 questions around assessment. So how does assessment guide your writing instruction? And then also, what's tricky about that process? So if you wouldn't mind, after you have changed your name, renamed yourself, logging into our Jamboard, you will see that the link is in the chat. Is that right, Julie?
No, and I was just texting Lauren because I'm recording. I cannot touch the chat room. So Lauren, I'll ask you to copy any links.
So there's the link there. Oops. And so if you're new to our sessions today, the Jamboard is a Google Chrome extension. Once you get into it, what you'll see is down the left-hand side, there's the ability to have sticky notes. And so I'm going to write myself a little note that formative oops, get rid of the spelling errors. And so then you're going to just find places that they fit within here. So we'll just give you a couple minutes to put some of your thoughts around assessment and how that guides your writing instruction. And then also what makes that tricky?
And as we're giving you a bit more time to write your post-its, we want to remind you, in case you're new and joining us today, we're strongly encouraging you to register to so we've got 1 more session tomorrow, but if you did not register to the previous session, just so you know, at the end of each session, we're sending you the recording of the session. So if you missed any of the sessions, feel free to email one of us, Lauren, Jody, or I, and we can share with you the recording of the other session that you may have missed.
Awesome. It's tricky when students, drastically different needs. Yeah, for sure, that differentiation can be really tricky, especially when we have large classrooms. And that's where we have to start to leverage those small group instruction pieces. We want to try to make sure that we are looking at doing our one-on-one conferencing so that we have those opportunities to have one-on-one conversations to support those students. Aligning with the Alberta curriculum, I'm going to put that one over to the side here. Our session tomorrow, that's one of the things that we are going to address. What you'll see in our session today is that we are going to talk about the tools that are associated with the writers, the units of study. and we're going to reference the rubrics, but what we decided is because really there's such a huge connection to our curriculum and the rubrics that we would spend some more significant time talking about those in their own session. And so we're going to make those connections for you, aligning with the Alberta curriculum, and ensure that there's clarity around how this framework and the resources can support the work that we're doing within our classrooms really easily. Feedback loop is essential for students in various phases of the writing process. Absolutely, that timely feedback is really important. And that's one of the things that they talk around is that, you know, with class sizes swelling the way that they are, making sure that we're maximizing our in-class time so that we're not taking copious amounts of work home with us. And so what are some of those strategies that are going to help us be more effective in the classroom and have more effective instruction for our students?
Just something I want to add, Jody, about the feedback loop, especially now in this online environment and not knowing what we would be dealing with next year. I know one of the big caution, one of the things that it's dangerous to fall into in an online delivery is to make sure that we don't just assign the work and then evaluate it, right? Like I know in many teachers, that's what, like you send the learning plan on Monday, the kids are doing it, and then you assess by Friday. For learning to happen, you need that feedback so they can get a chance to go back to what they submit so they can work on their skills. So that's something to keep in mind for next year. But also in the yeah, the power of that feedback, that's when the learning can happen.
Yeah, assessment helps to know where, what the mini lessons, like what your students need, and absolutely. So this is really responsive teaching. And so that's good practice to be able to respond to what our kids are needing, where our kids are at. And I think given our context going into September, that's going to be really, really important for teachers, as Julie identified, you know, especially given the fact that this last half of our year has been tricky for a lot of families. And so where kids are at might not be where they would have been if we'd had a regular school year to the end of June. And so knowing and responding to where they're at is going to be essential. Right, so many skills can potentially be assessed in a singular writing piece. Absolutely, that's true. You want to make sure that it's targeted. Oh, what did I just do? Really targeted pieces, and that the kids are aware of what's being assessed prior to. So these are the things that, the goals that they're setting, the work that you're doing in your class is really reflective in the assessment that you are utilizing. So Julie, Lauren, are there any others that we want to speak to before we go back into the presentation?
No, I think that's good. Again, good reminder, make sure to add any questions, put it in the chat box and we will address them during this presentation.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so Lauren, I'm going to get you to kick us off.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what assessment can look like within the workshop. So if you are just joining us for the first session today, we've talked a lot about what the cycle of workshop looks like, and perhaps what are areas that we can do assessment in. So we have our mini lesson, clear, concise, concrete, 10 minutes, and then the students are writing up to 40 minutes, and in that time is when you're conferring. So if we look at Anne Davies's work about the triangulation of data, let's get Jody to click on there.
Oh, sorry, my bad. Oh, look at what I'm doing.
Yeah, so we have the triangulation of data, we have observation, conversations, and products. So when we look at how this works with workshop, we have a lot of different opportunities. So observation is obviously going to happen throughout. If you're with us for the mini lesson session, you would have noticed that, you know, there's a section when we listen into what students are talking about. So that's a good really kind of observation piece to see where students are at. And conversations are something that's going to be happening all of the time as well in the mini lessons. So those are times that you're going to be listening to the conversations and maybe talking to a couple of students, but also in that really, really important time during conferring. That's when you're going to have some really deep conversations with groups or individual students about their writing and perhaps what they're working on. Finally, we're going to use things like their notebooks to take a look at the products that they're producing, in whether small pieces of writing, on demand, which we will talk about today, or their published work, those kind of boosted pieces of work. So always considering balanced data and not just kind of what the final piece of writing is, so that product piece. So really, really understanding, and the really powerful thing is having students be able to have conversations about their learning and what they're working on.
Awesome. So today we're going to be looking at an asset. If you have your units of study with you at home, the book that we are spending our time in today is the Writing Pathways book. It is not coil bound. It's one of the normal spine bounding. This is a really great resource. But I think it's interesting because I like this because at the beginning it has some really great in-depth discussions around some of the tools that we're going to introduce you to. And so I've highlighted the chapters that you would find those in, where you can look for additional tips and tricks in utilizing these tools. So that's at the beginning piece of this. And then it has all of the checklists, rubrics, student samples, those sorts of things in it. The real power, however, is when we're looking at, once we've registered our resource, then we're going to go into our account. So I'm going to go into my online resources. And once I find my resource, I'm going to go to, it's going to look like this when it pops up. Sorry, I've got this open. So I come to the front matter page. The place that we're going to spend our time today is around that Writing Pathways here. And what's really brilliant about this is not only do we get it in a hard copy with our book, but then we have all of these assets for us in the Writing Pathways section of the online place. You will see that just like the units of study, that the online is broken down into the 3 main genres. So everything to do with argument writing is going to be in this first section. So we're looking at our rubrics, our checklists, our samples, those annotated samples that we referenced in the conferring piece. And then we're going to move on to informational writing. So a really rich resource for us to be able to leverage within our classrooms. Then moving on, we are going to talk and begin with one of the biggest tools I think that is such a powerful tool to implement into our instruction is called the on-demand performance assessment. And basically what an on-demand is it's where we are provided with a writing prompt that is specific to the unit or the genre that your students are beginning, and that you have all the students write from the same writing prompt for the teachers to look at. And so it is a timed activity. So what we're doing is we're giving our students 45 minutes to be able to look at that topic and then to produce their writing. When are we going to use this and why would we want to use this? Well, certainly we want to use the on-demand piece of writing for formative assessment. But we also, Lauren, did I just take your slide?
Yep, that's all good. Keep going. You're doing wonderful.
You're on the roll. You're on the roll.
Sorry.
Okay.
So we're going to use it as a formative assessment tool, and I'm going to show you how to do that here in a second after I let Lauren continue to talk. And then the other thing that we can do is we can use this as a part of a norming activity so that teachers come together from a prompt and talk about what they're seeing in their students' writing and some of the patterns, and then be able to be responsive to how collectively we move forward to support those kids. And then finally, we're going to do the on-demand again at the end of the unit so we can see the growth of our students over time. So Lauren, sorry, do you want to add to any of
No,
that?
just exactly what you said, Jody. Like this is kind of your piece that's going to be the same for every student. So you're able to see where they're at to start and then where their growth is at the end of the genre, especially when they've learned more about that genre. So they should, and they will, have a way richer piece of writing towards the end of that.
Sorry, Lauren.
That's all good. Okay, so what we did here is we just left an example of what an on-demand looks like. So there's going to be the prompt to the students. I want you to think of a topic, something that you studied, you've known a lot about, or you know a lot about, and then giving them that opportunity to write about it. And with the on-demands, and especially with the higher grades, one thing that's really important is that you're going to give them, and as we know, not every student's going to do this, but what you're going to do is you're going to give them an opportunity to think about it. So you're going to give them 24-hour notice that they're going to be writing about this. And then you're going to be making sure that you're giving them really specific things to look for. So in your writing, make sure you write an introduction, elaborate with a variety of information, organize your writing, use transition words, things like that. So you are giving them an outline beyond this prompt, and you're giving them an opportunity to think about it. Within the information writing unit, it even says that like you can go and look, find some information or ideas about a topic. A lot of feedback that we're getting is, I'm not surprised, middle school students aren't really doing that. A lot of the keen students will, but it's a prompt. It's the same for everybody. There's some specific bullet points that you need to do. On the top right corner, just if you're interested on your own time, one of the organizers, writers, Jody's crush, Mary Aaronsworth, talks about just why the on-demand is such a powerful tool.
Yep. And there's also such value in some of the observations that you're going to see when your students are doing this writing. So you're going to be using this time to watch your students who takes time, a long time to get started, who is really focused and has done some pre-work and some pre-thinking about this, and the writing just starts to come easily. Who plans before they start writing, and then who just sits down and just starts to free write. This is all really valuable information and can be really helpful for a teacher before we've even begun the unit in creating some small groups or some small group instruction opportunities, mini lessons, those sorts of things around some of the student behaviors that they witness when they're doing the on-demand. So one of the biggest questions that we get from teachers is that when they look at the units of study, they say, okay, you know what, you're supposed to do an on-demand at the beginning, an on-demand at the end. They're writing the entire time. I've got 30, 35 kids in my classroom. How is it that I'm going to be able to manage reading all of this stuff, providing feedback on all of these pieces, and still have some sort of life? And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to share with you kind of the process of what the on-demand is, because these are like the big products. If we're looking at that triangulation from Ann Davies, these are three really big products that are really useful, but they're useful in different ways. And so therefore we're going to look at them and assess them and judge them differently. And we wanted to make sure that we were really clear about what that could look like in your classroom. So that initial on-demand that Lauren was talking about, that's going to give us our sense of our initial baseline. Like, what do I have? What do my students know about this particular genre, and then give me some insight about how I need to be responsive and do some adjustments in the units or the lessons that I'm doing. But I get these initial on-demands. I've watched them write. I take them home that night. You're not going to spend more than maybe an hour looking at these, maybe not even. We're going to use something called a thin slicing protocol, because I don't need to read these on-demands word for word to begin with. What I need to get is I need to get a sense of patterns that are happening for my students. And so I can skim read these. And so a thin slicing protocol, what that looks like for us is that I'm going to take my pile, I'm going to skim read through them, and I'm going to make 3 piles in front of myself. I'm going to take some criteria specific criteria that I'm going to think about in advance. So if I'm doing narrative, for example, maybe I'm looking for just the basic beginning, middle, end structure. Maybe I'm going to look at some strategies that I know that they did the year before to further their story. So like the use of dialogue or descriptive detail. So I'm going to skim read for these particular pieces of criteria, and I'm going to put them into 3 piles. My middle pile is going to be those students like they get it. It's like the average looking student as far as, yes, they're kind of on track. They have a good sense of the genre. But then I'm going to have those outliers, and those outliers are really important. So I'm going to look for students that perhaps are struggling. Maybe they didn't, in 45 minutes, they were only able to do a half a page of writing, and they didn't have a story that had a beginning, middle, and end. So I'm going to identify those students that perhaps need some extra support on the one side. And then I'm also going to identify those students that we go, wow, this is pretty exceptional for, they are well beyond where I would expect the global group to be. And so I'm going to have my high flyers on one end and my struggling students on the other. What's really important about this is that the units of study and the lessons that you're going to be providing your students is going to take care of all of those students in the middle, in that middle pile. What you're going to do then is you're going to look at those smaller piles, the high end and the low end, and that's going to give you an opportunity to do some small group instruction right away. So I'm going to pull those kiddos in because they need some support about being able to brainstorm and get going on writing their narrative. The high flyers are going to, I'm going to start to push them a little bit, so I'm going to augment and offer them some enrichment pieces. But what's really important about this on demand is I'm skim reading. I'm picking specific criteria. I'm going to skim, I'm going to place them into 3 piles, and that is all I'm going to be able to do with these. I'm not writing all over them. I'm not making detailed notes about each one of them. I'm simply putting them into the piles so that I can have a sense of where I need to go with my students. What's really important then is that the next day, you're going to take these on demands back into our classroom, and we're going to do some goal setting, and we're going to look at checklists with them. So remember that one of the things I think is a strength for the writers, the units of study, is that we're really trying to shift the responsibility and the accountability back onto our students. And so they need to look at their own writing. They need to look at a checklist and be able to identify, you know, what are my goals for this unit as a writer going to be? And then I'm going to keep those goals top of mind as I work through the rest of the unit. But that's going to be self-driven. And we're going to talk a little bit about that importance of goal setting a little bit later in the presentation. So that's our initial on-demand at the very, very end of the unit. And the prompt remains to be the exact same as the initial one, because what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to measure apples to apples. And so at the end of the unit, the end of the 6 weeks, what kind of progress has our students been able to do in that specific genre? This is the product that you are going to maybe spend some time evaluating. So this is where you're going to go through and you're going to use your rubric and you're going to be able to give it some summative assessment and then some feedback accordingly. But really, truly, we want to also take this and have an opportunity to look at the growth that has happened from the beginning on demand to the second, to our summative on demand. And we want to be able to make sure that those strategies and the work that we've been doing over the course of the unit has really been supporting those students as they grow. And then the last piece, so then you say, okay, well, you know what, but we've spent so much time lifting and polishing and working on those pieces throughout the unit. What do we do with that? Well, that published piece of work is not something that I'm going to do a summative assessment of, because it has been lifted by your mini lessons, your conferences, yourself that has gone in and supported students, their peers have supported them in building that. It's not a true representation of what they can do within the same sort of parameters as we would do in that on demand initially. And so I want to celebrate that published work. We want to be able to look at that, and we want to assess how the process of writing went. So instead of paying attention and assessing the product, I'm going to look at the process. How coachable was my student? When I was giving them things to work on, were they engaging? Were they transferring that into their writing? Were they building their skills? How well were they listening? What sorts of, how were they working within that cycle? Were they actually trying to build their skill by redrafting and re-editing? So we're going to look at that process of writing a little bit differently, and that focus changes. How am I going to support that work? I'm going to use these ongoing checklists and the writing process progressions to support me in making those sorts of decisions. And really, what's important about this is, again, the focus has changed. So I'm celebrating process, not product with the published piece, but I am celebrating it. And tomorrow we'll spend a little bit of time talking about what those celebrations could potentially look like. So Lauren, were you going to take us into the chat?
Sure. So we just wanted to ask you what's resonating with you right now about this tool. What are you thinking about? Have you used it before? If not, what are you thinking? We'll just give you a couple minutes to write that in the chat.
Just because I spent a lot of time, I gave you a lot of information thinking about those on demands. So like, what are those trickies? What are the things that you're thinking about? What resonates with you? Are there any ahas that you think, oh yeah, okay, now I get it? Because we have heard that some people aren't using the on-demand in their classrooms. And what we're hoping is that you're going to be able to see how effective it could be in supporting the work that you're doing.
Yeah, okay, so Jennifer, asking just for a little bit of clarification. So the on-demand is a piece of writing that you're asking for, like on demand. Right now, you're asking for a piece of writing is the way that I think about it. And essentially when we say on demand, it's a prompt that's very specific to the genre that you're giving students, and they have 40 minutes to write about it.
Jody,
here's the prompt. I want you to, sorry?
No, I was just asking Jody to go back to the slide with the actual prompts.
Oh, sorry, you guys. You want me to go back on a slide?
Just to
yeah, just to the prompt example.
Oh, okay. Right there?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the prompt you would give them, and then alongside this prompt, there's going to be some bullets like make sure you X, Y, Z, have an introduction, whatever it is.
But you're giving,
so, yeah, you're going to
45 minutes. Go.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
And then yes, and that 24-hour piece, it gives students to think about it who kind of will struggle to begin writing. So other students will be able to map it out in their head, maybe look for more information. It just gives everybody a little bit of time to think about it.
Yeah, and the reason that we would do it a second time is that then we're going to be able to do a comparison of growth over time for our students. And so that's a really good measure for us, and it's going to provide us with if there are opportunities that we're going to have to maybe make some change around. There was a comment about the published work, not assessing the published work. I guess what I'm saying to you is that at the end of the unit, you don't need to assess 2 essays or 2 argument responses. The one that you're going to put the validity in as far as this is what they can do under these circumstances is going to be your on-demand. That published piece has been lifted by over time. It has been drafted and edited and revised. It's had support of others. So it isn't necessarily a true reflection of what those kiddos can do within that point. I'm not suggesting you don't use it in some way as an assessment. I'm just saying that, you don't need to put the copious amounts of feedback on it, because the other thing about that is that you've probably been providing them with feedback throughout the process around this particular piece and giving them conferencing points. So that feedback isn't what's important, at least from you. When we talk about the celebrations, we want to be able to share them with our with their peers and have authentic audiences look at them. And we want them to be able to provide feedback on those pieces to celebrate that learning. But it's not necessary for you to necessarily do that.
I like
Does that
Justine's.
answer your question?
Yeah, I was just going to look at Justine's question. She said, like, a lot of the students for that initial on-demand, the entries are quite minimum. Like, the kids don't know what to write about, and they don't write much. They feel they're on the spot. And this is why I love by doing that initial on-demand, but then doing it at the end so you can compare the product. So you can show, like, to me, that would be a perfect example to put in my blueprint, where you can say, look, this was like before we taught you all those skills, and look now. So it's such a good comparison. But I think also, Justine, like, the first time you do it, like me, like Jody, we always laugh. Jody loves doing quick writes. I hate quick writes. Despise quick writes, because I always feel I'm on the spot. But if I'm being forced to do it more and more, it'll become less on the spot, kind of. And especially if we tell and it goes back to telling the kids, what's the purpose? Why am I asking you to do an on-demand? Is to help you. So maybe taking the time to explain to your students, why are we doing the on-demand? So hopefully we have answered a few. Hopefully, Jennifer, that clarified your question.
And if not, then please stick around at the end, and we can certainly have a conversation about it. The next thing that we want to spend some time, though, is we want to talk about these checklists that I've been referencing earlier. And again, being able to structure these checklists so that we can start to monitor progress towards a bigger goal. And be able to measure over time how much progress is being made, and what are the next steps for that student to be working on as they're continuing to write moving forward. What's really interesting about, so there's a really great chapter in here, in chapter 5 in this book is excellent, and I did a little light reading of it again last night. I would really encourage teachers, if you have time, to have a glass of wine and do a little bit of reading, because they have all sorts of really good tips and tricks to this. One of the things that I found really interesting around what they were saying was that checklists make it more likely that people don't forget what they already know. So that's one thing, but it also helps them aim to the goal to which they wish to achieve. And I think that's really important. And as I said to you, it also gives us a way to be able to track some of that data over time. These checklists are grade-specific slices of the writing progressions. And we're going to introduce you to the writing progressions after this. But essentially what they're doing is they're capturing where a student should look like within that progression of writing at that particular time. The checklist, the thing that they talk about the most in here is that these checklists are not meant just simply to be given to our students, that they do not negate our responsibility to teach to these skills. And so these skills, what we should be doing is that when I'm doing my mentor text, when I'm working with pieces in my own notebook, that I'm using these checklists, and I'm showing students how I can use these checklists to against some of my mentor text, so they can see what each of those different pieces or components look like specifically. Something else that we want to make sure that we understand is that if I'm teaching in grade 6 at the beginning of the year and I'm starting with my narrative unit, I'm not going to be using my grade 6 checklist because I haven't taught them anything yet. And so I'm going to go back and I'm going to use the grade 5 checklist. And so you want to make sure that they're going to be introduced to or using checklists where they've already developed some of those skills from the previous year. And it's not going to be until a half or 2/3 of the way through your unit that you're going to start to use that grade appropriate checklist. Now, remember I said to you that when I did my thin slicing and I looked at, I've got some students that are maybe perhaps advancing, then I might give them the grade 6 checklist right away. And if they're progressing beyond that, then I'm going to be moving them towards the elements that are seen in a grade 7 checklist. And again, it's about that continuum of writing progression that we want to support for our kids. I think we were talking earlier, Chris, I was saying to you that this is a really great opportunity for people within content areas to use these sorts of checklists to support their genre, the writing that they're doing in their disciplines. And then being able to leverage that vocabulary and those shared strategies across all of the disciplines will really start to strengthen and build those skills for our kiddos. It also provides us as colleagues a really rich opportunity to discuss the skills, and because we're looking and talking about some of the same sorts of things. Checklists are really important, kind of have to sell them a little bit. I used to, in my classroom, I used to talk to my kids, we'd create some goals at the beginning of this, because I can use these checklists to establish my goals. So if you notice that the checklist that we have in the presentation, it gives me a criteria point, and then it says not yet, starting to, and yes, I have it. And so that then is going to be something I'm going to look at and say, okay, what is the most important thing on this checklist I want to prioritize? Because if I have a whole bunch of not yets, I'm not going to pick all of them to set goals on. I'm going to pick the one that is going to make the biggest difference in my writing to begin with, and that's going to be my priority. I'm going to establish a goal around that, and then I'm going to be mindful of that goal as I work through all of my pieces through the course of the unit. These are also things that you would want to be sharing and talking around as part of your conference with your students. So what does that mean? Well, that means that these goals are probably going to be established somewhere in their notebook. Some people have the idea of putting their like an entire goal setting section together within their notebook so that they can easily go back to that. It might be a section that is associated with some of your conferring notes for your students. So again, that organizational piece is something to do a little bit of thinking around. Julie, Lauren,
just one of the comments in the box was talking about you can white out the top. Yeah. And I think that that's really, really important because as we've said in prior sessions, some of the writing expectations are quite high in Writer's Workshop if it's not something that you've vertically grown within your school or within your feeder school as well as your middle school. So we absolutely recommend that. Because yes, there's the chances of you having students working on various checklists is incredibly high, as well as there's a checklist that'll have a split. So it'll be grade 6 and grade 7, and again, whiting out the top, but then they can see where they are now and maybe where they need to grow. And then the other thing I was going to say, Jody, is if you are not a generalist teacher, but you are working on an information writing unit, one thing that would be really powerful is to at least show the checklist to the science teacher or to the social teacher to say, hey, I know that you guys are working on a paper about whatever it is, and here are some things that we're really working on in ELA and some things that the students will know, so some things that they can use and leverage, perhaps even this checklist when they're using writing the assignment in your class.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I would say is that, and it's at grade 5 is the last year that they actually have illustrated checklists. So from grade 1 to 5, in Heinemann, you have options of an illustrated checklist, and then you have a checklist similar to the checklist that you'll be seeing that they start in grade 6 and move forward. And the other thing that I would say is like, yes, absolutely, taking out that grade level at the top is really important. And I think what's really interesting about this is that we know that within our classroom that a student might be working on some elements in like a grade 6 checklist, but also some elements in a grade 7. And maybe even they have an element in grade 5 that they're looking at. So again, it allows for our students to be very differentiated and us to be able to target that instruction appropriately.
I'm thinking on my blueprint, this to me, using that checklist would be such a good entry in my blueprint where kids get to talk, to share. So to do this, asking them to do it orally, I think would be such a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely, Julie. Okay, so just looking at our time, ladies, because I
Mm.
obviously spent a lot of time talking.
You're gonna lose the bet, Jody. You're gonna lose the bet.
Jody was Jody thought we would finish earlier today,
Yeah.
and I would say yeah. So
So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our breakout rooms. And so we're going to try to look at these checklists, and we're going to see, we're going to ask you to do two things. When you go into the breakout room, you're going to look at, and you should be familiar with the student samples from yesterday. Then what you're going to do is you're going to read your grade level sample and then use that checklist to discuss where the student might be placing themselves on utilizing that checklist. So again, it's meant to be a student self-assessment, but we're just wanting you to be able to see how we could leverage this as a part of a peer assessment piece, or even thinking about it how in the context of how students would utilize this tool. So the second question then would be, how would you leverage this tool in your classroom? So
perfect. I'm opening the room. Jody will go with maybe 5 minutes because of the time. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. And then, okay, so I'm sending you all in your own breakout room.
I'm gonna just bring us back, and I'm gonna give you like a 10-second conversation or comment, because we've already been talking a little bit about goal setting. But one of the things that's really important about it is that we teach our students how to do this. And I'm gonna tell you that when I receive my kids like in 9 and 10, even in my grade 12 class, they don't necessarily know how to do that. And so I have to explicitly teach. On this slide, what you'll see on the left-hand side is a really great anchor chart. And the anchor chart is going to help kind of walk your kids through how they could leverage the checklists and use their notebooks to support that goal setting in your classroom. And of course, we want to talk to them about the whole growth mindset piece. As I said earlier, some of the assets that are in the units of study, such as the strategy cards, are certainly things that can be supportive of the goals that the kids are creating for themselves and the goals that you are working collaboratively on with them. So, Lauren, I'm going to let you do your fast learning progressions piece.
Okay, so learning progressions, it's this humongous document and it's overwhelming, and I'm going to give you like a quick and dirty about what it is. So the learning progressions are essentially a continuum to show you how the skills of writing develop from one grade to the next. The idea is so that we as teachers can understand how to move students' writing forward, but also to understand how the writing is developed. And so I feel as though when teachers see it, it's really powerful, because then they can see the growth that's kind of expected throughout the genre. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in on one specific area for you to see, and then I'm going to show you something that's going to be really powerful for you to be able to do on your own time. So I'm going to boot you out, Jody.
Yep, go ahead, stop my share.
So we have linked the progressions to a folder, and we will be handing those out to you. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. And so here's a zoomed in 3-grade span for argument writing. And so just on the left, because I had to cut it off because it starts at grade 3, here are your areas. So overall, what does it look like for argument writing? What does the lead look like? Transitions, ending, and organization. So the one thing that you really want as a teacher want to focus on, and one of the conversations that we had in our small group was, most of our students are low, or they're not going to be writing at that grade 6 kind of area. They could be writing at the grade 4, but what the most powerful thing that you can do with the learning progressions is look at what's the difference between a grade 4 and a grade 6 piece of writing, or a grade 5 and a grade 6 piece of writing, and in what area. So one activity that's really powerful that I learned and that I'm sort of obsessed with, and I'll do an example quickly, is looking at what's the difference between the grades and highlighting that within the next grade, because those are the things that you want to A, teach, B, you can confer about to lift that level. So an example, if we go into, I'll just do, say, the beginning piece. So the writer, let's look at grade 5, and the assumption would be I'm a grade 6 teacher. So the writer made a claim or thesis on a topic or text, supported it with reasons, and provided a variety of evidence for each reason. Now going next, we're going to talk about how they, there's a new word, they explain the topic that can be supported with a variety of trustworthy sources. The other one was just reasons. And then each part of the text helped build the argument, so build an argument, and led to a conclusion. So if we look, here are some things, here are some tips that we can do to push our writers forward. Here's the difference between the overall argument writing between grade 5 and grade 6. And then what you would do is you would want to write and do the difference between grades 5 to grade 6 to grade 7, sorry. And then what you're going to do again is you're going to look for whatever the differences may be, because that's going to be really, really powerful. Because again, if you have students who are writing above grade level, or you want to push, here are some ways that you can do it. So it's an incredible tool. When you look in the folder, it's going to be a huge span. I would recommend look at a genre that you're not as comfortable with, and then it's going to be very eye-opening for you.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was, Allison was commenting on how this is really helpful. We're figuring out where kids are at. This progression is like, regardless of grade, is telling us how we can move our students, and can be super helpful for us. As I know report cards are always stressful people, they're trying to make up comments. Like I would go to these progressions and I would say, oh, you know what, the student's doing this really well and we're working on this, and here's the language, it's already there for you. It's also a great place, as you identified, Allison, to have conversations with your parents that are trying to support their kiddos, because here's some language that they could be utilizing as well.
But also it's a continuum of skills. Like I don't like saying like I'm teaching grade 5. That's not true. I'm not teaching grade 5. I've got kids in different parts, in different areas at different levels. So I think that progression is helping you seeing that big continuum, right?
Right.
So we are out of time. We had one more slide that said rubrics, and it essentially said, we're talking about it tomorrow. So there are rubrics included. It is an American resource. We will help you kind of understand how you can still use that rubric. That's tomorrow. One other thing just before we go is
Lauren, you may want to share your screen.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now. Is we gave you a summary of everything we talked about. So please go into the presentation and take a look. We talked about a lot of different tools today. Your brain is spinning. And we've made you a chart about the what and the why, and the when, sorry. So go through the presentation again a couple times, get familiar with at least one tool would be our recommendation.
And something that we want to leave you with tomorrow, it's our last session with you formally in this. However, we're still available if you have any questions. But if you have specific things that we haven't addressed, or if there's stuff that we may have shared, but it's still circling in your head, please write it in the chat box, or write us an email on things that we may not have covered, but that you would like us to address for our last session tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're trying to do it more like a question and answer session to give you that flexibility. So feel free to write us in the chat box any suggestions for tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think, Allison, you're right. Sometimes there is some anxiety about kiddos that should have gotten, or you should remember this from last year. And that's not how we want to position that, right? We just want to be able to say, okay, so here are some skills that you've discussed, or here's some learning that you may have had in the past. And if they haven't, that's okay, because that's where you're going to be your starting point for them. And that's how you're going to be able to differentiate.
And one of the recommendations that we were given was for the on-demand, the should have known last year. First of all, the prompt is the same every year. And
Yeah.
if you're just starting Writer's Workshop, they say introduce what the genre is. Read them a piece of text, a mentor text, to show them this is what an argumentative the genre looks like,
Yeah.
sounds like, and now I want you to kind of show me your understanding of what this might look like, and then now you do the on-demand. So don't be afraid to introduce the genre if it's something that they might not even be familiar with. And it could be like, and even just the wording people use, they might it's like an opinion piece. Well, it's an argument. Well, what's the difference, right? Like, let's talk about what argument writing actually means.
Yeah. Really good points.
Okay, we should
All right,
probably
we're
let
out
them
of
go.
time. I lost the bet. Way to go, Joe. That was my fault entirely. Talk too much.
All right, and Julie, you can stop recording, I think, now.
And leave them in the chat.